Hello everybody. Well, I think you've probably guessed, based on the introduction and on my lovely decorations behind me and on my lovely badge as well that I'm wearing, that this is my first podiversary episode. I will introduce myself first. So for anybody who has never been here before, my name is Gerard, or Peter, or Boniface. I am a former monk, a former bus driver. I crochet and knit and sew and weave and want to spin and basically do anything that's fibre related. I live in Abingdon-on-Thames in the southeast of England, a small town about 7 miles due south of the city of Oxford. And I live with my two cats, Toby and Bunty. Toby is just off camera here, but as soon as I start recording, of course, has to come over and be fussed over. Bunty, I think, is sleeping next door, so she may pop in and see us, or she may not. As anyone who has been a regular viewer will know, they will just appear at the most inopportune moments, usually. So, as I say, welcome if this is your first time viewing, and welcome back to all of my regular viewers and subscribers. And I have an interesting episode today, really, because as I say, it is the first podiversary. It was, I think, Monday the 6th of February last year that I recorded and uploaded my first ever episode, and in honour of that I'm actually wearing the same clothes. Well, yes, they are exactly the same clothes. I think even the trousers are the same that I was wearing a year ago, which is quite nice. And I sat at my desk and I looked down at the camera. The camera was the front camera of my iPad, and it had a slightly lower resolution. I didn't have a microphone, so you could barely hear me speak, and you were basically looking at my nostrils the whole time. And I had lots of hair and a big beard, and the following week the hair and the beard had all gone, and it was all rather amusing. But I have decided to, in this episode, I actually have no finished objects. I do have a whip, which I'm currently working on, and I don't have any acquisitions, probably for the first time ever, which is not such a bad thing, because I need to use the things I've got rather than keep replacing. Toby, I'm sorry, I'm podcasting. You really are going to have to go and find somewhere else to play. Go on. That's a good boy. Go on. There you are. That's a good boy. So, one thing I do have to get out of the way first. I promised Wendy, my good friend Wendy, that a mankini would make an appearance in this episode. I think we were in, I can't remember, we went out last Saturday into town. She needed some fabric from Masons, and I bought the wool that I talked about last week, the Gems wool, the West Yorkshire Spinners, and it's Wensleydale, 100% Wensleydale. Really very nice, very strong feeling wool, but not very, not scratchy at all. And while we were out, I needed some belts. And we went in a couple of shops and they didn't have them. And I think we were in Poundland. I'm sure Wendy will correct me, but I think we were in Poundland, and on sale in Poundland were these mankinis. And I said, well, you know, should I get one for the podcast? Not meaning that I was going to wear it, obviously. So here we are, Wendy. This is the mankini. So I hope you enjoyed the dancing gnome mankini. You can find almost anything on the internet, I've discovered. It's an amazing place, if a little weird sometimes. Now, the second part of this is that I understand from my young friends, from the young people, that there is a bit of a craze called dabbing, that whenever you succeed at doing something or show somebody that you're better than them or that you've done something that they wouldn't approve of, you dab, which seems an extraordinary thing. And I promise you, I am not going to do it. I'm simply not cool enough and down in the hoods with my homies to be able to successfully carry off a dab. So instead I present to you Miss Betty White. And there we go. So I hope you enjoyed that, Wendy, and I hope the rest of you enjoyed my little, yes, my little amusements. So, as I say, I don't have any finished objects. A lot of you have left some very positive messages for me. I have read them all. I haven't responded to anybody yet. The motor accident I had wasn't in itself very serious. It wasn't pleasant, but it wasn't, as I say, everyone walked away, and you know, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. On the same day that the accident happened, I had been going to my local pharmacy to pick up my prescription because I'd run out of one of my tablets the day before and hadn't actually taken it on the Monday, because I normally take my tablets just before I go to bed because they do make me very drowsy. And I'd noticed on Monday night that I'd forgotten to go to the pharmacy, and I'd run out of one of my tablets that night. And so on the Tuesday I was going to the pharmacy, and of course, because of all the time it takes to clear up an accident and deal with the police and all the rest of it, by the time I'd finished all that, it was already 5 o'clock, and I had a half-hour drive then in the peak traffic to get home, by which time the pharmacy was closed. So I hadn't taken one of my tablets on the Monday or on the Tuesday. So by the time Wednesday and Thursday were there, you're not quite getting withdrawal, but there is a feeling of anxiety and concern that builds, and it takes a few days then for everything, together with the shock of the accident, it takes a few days for everything to calm back down again. So I noticed probably Thursday this week that I had started. This is when I went. I'll come back to Thursday this week in a moment. I'll just go back a year and a half. I was off work between June and December, well, the end of November in 2016, which is when I learned to crochet. So it's, you know, there's something positive came out of that. But I had to go in once a month for occupational health sessions to meet the occupational health advisor and just talk about the treatment and the prognosis and the likely return to work and what could be done to facilitate that. And as I worked in HR, I knew what the process was, so I was able to not circumvent it, but move it on rather. But for the first few of those, I couldn't go to work. I mean, by which I couldn't face leaving the flat to go to work. So I had telephone consultations, and the fourth one, I think it was September. I think it was around my birthday. I'd gone in for my occupational health session, and one of the girls in accounts, we have three. We have a senior management accountant, a management accountant, and a trainee accountant, and all three of them are really lovely women, and they're very nice people and very supportive people. And the middle one, the management accountant, said to me that she really missed me not being at work because nobody else sang in the corridors or danced down the corridors, because I would do a tango down the corridors or whatever dance was floating around in my head, and the music was floating around. I'm not a very good singer by any stretch of the imagination. I can hold a tune, but I don't have a great voice. And I like music, and when music is one of the ways in which I find expression for myself. So if I am happy, then I will sing. If I'm sad, then I will sing, and it will be a sad song. And it was quite, at the time, it was oh yeah, I suppose I do that, and I hadn't really thought that I did that kind of thing, but do that. Well, Thursday this week was the first day since the accident that I've actually had. I found myself walking up the stairs, and it was really banal, but what I was singing, yeah, I don't know whether I should confess to this really. What I was singing was, oh, the name's, I can't remember the name of the song I was singing. It was Fernando. It was ABBA, Fernando. Don't ask me why. I don't know. Obviously, some earworm had got into my head, and it had suddenly, maybe it had been on the radio. In the workshops, which my office fronts out onto, we have radio playing over the loudspeakers for the guys working on in the engineering department. We pay the license for it, so there's no funny business going on. So obviously, I don't recall if it was played, but possibly it was played on radio, because they listen to Radio 2, I think. It may well have been played, or some snippet of it may have been played, and obviously it got into my head, and I was walking up the stairs singing. So that was a positive sign. There is a way to go yet. I have suffered from depression and anxiety for probably all of my adult life, certainly for the last 24, 25 years. So this is not a new experience for me. I have been in hospital on 4 separate occasions due to the depression, rather. Both when I was in the monastery and subsequently since I'd left the monastery. So I'm not unaware of the process within myself of the cycles, if you like, of becoming depressed and anxious. Actually, I really never knew that I was anxious until this last time, when I saw a psychiatrist again. My doctor referred me because I was sleeping for 19 hours a day, which is not generally a good sign. And she diagnosed anxiety, and that the sleeping, she felt, was part of the coping mechanism that my body had just decided to say, right, we're not going to stay awake, everything's going to shut down, kind of thing. So it was only really Christmas, January time, probably actually just before I decided to start this podcast, that I realised what it felt to be ordinary, if you know what I mean, where that super tense state of concern, of seeing every possibility, of holding yourself so that this happens in exactly the right way. All of those feelings just were calmed down. They've not disappeared by any stretch of the imagination, but they have significantly calmed down. So that's a very positive thing. So, you know, now I know what life is supposed to be like. It's actually been quite pleasant. And I say all this because I think yesterday was one of the awareness days. I don't know exactly the date, but it was about awareness of mental health issues. And I think there's a lot of stigma still attached. I certainly have faced direct discrimination on the basis of my mental health. In 2006, I am as confident as I can be that I was evicted because I was in hospital, because of the hospital I was in, which was a mental health hospital in Oxford, which the letting agents decided made me too high a risk to continue the residency, and so they served notice for us to quit, which is of course something that you really want to have to face when you're going through a depressive episode. And everything worked out fine. In fact, I ended up in this flat that I'm in now, which is actually better. It's a much nicer place, it's a much nicer location. I'm very happy with the community in which I'm involved, so, you know, silver linings and all the rest of it. But I know that there is a lot of, I mean, people at work, I know a lot of people through work. As a company, we have 600 employees, but over the 15 to 18 years that I've worked there, there have been something like 2,000 employees. Because it's shift work, it tends to be, for a lot of people, a temporary role while they sort something out and move on to something else, as it was in fact for me, although I still work for the same company. But we have some drivers. We've had one who's just resigned this month, having completed 50 years with the company as a driver. So we have some people who really do just see it through to the end and enjoy the work and enjoy the job enough that they stick with it. So I know a lot of people through work and at work, and they've known my past. I've never hidden my monastic life or my depression. And of course, I've been ill twice whilst working for this employer, so it's not something that you can just pretend didn't happen. Nor would I want to, in fact. Sorry, I'm sitting here with knitting in my lap and not doing any. So it's something for people of a religious bent that it's, you know, how do you despair of God? And of course you don't. And it's not that it's an unfair question, it's that it's a question that actually misses the point of depression and anxiety. It's not that you despair, it's that your mindset changes in subtle ways such that you can't see beyond a situation you find yourself in, that you can't allow yourself to progress beyond the situation you're in. And I'm talking about my personal experience. Other people will have other issues and other traumas that may well be the condition that triggers their depression. Sorry, this is my podiversary episode, and I didn't. It seems slightly incongruous to be talking about depressive illness and wearing a badge. And sorry, I think. Oh yeah, it's still recording. I lost the screen for a moment. I'm sorry to wave my hand across the screen like that. But it's an intrinsic part of who I am, and in a way, actually, the recovery that I've had over the last 12 months, certainly, is in large part due to doing everything that interests me, and doing it with a supportive, positive community, celebrating creativity, celebrating beauty, the yarns and tools that we use, which are, you know, and the books that we look at and the patterns that we ogle and salivate over. You know, it's all of that. And I've said this at the New Year, all of that is a kind of cognitive behavioural therapy for me, that it's actually allowing me to move my life forward. So I don't see I mean, I'd obviously rather not have a mental health problem, but I don't see it as being a life sentence either. It's something I have to manage in the same way as other people with disabilities have to manage. I have a good friend with type 1 diabetes, and she has to inject herself with insulin on a regular basis. You know, and she lives a complete life managing a condition, and I see my own life in the same way. So I'm sharing that both to enlighten my audience, my community, and also maybe to just raise awareness for those who maybe have problems, similar problems in their own life, and don't know how to deal with those feelings. It helps to know that there are other people that you look to, that you admire, maybe that you enjoy the company of, who also suffer from these issues. So I think, you know, I think it's a positive thing to share. So I will actually talk about my whip. I just need to finish this little section. It's the Scania shawl, the knit along that I'm doing with the Grocery Girls Off Our Needles podcast on Craftsy. I haven't, as I say, I have read everyone's messages on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube, and I am beginning now to come out of the whole last 10 days and be more positive and re-embrace the positive energies of what's going on. So I will be responding to people as well. So I apologise that I haven't responded, but please don't take that as a sign that I've not I've not responded internally to what you've been saying, and I'm the positive support and the prayers and the positive wishes have really helped, I'm sure, with the speed with which I've kind of bounced back to almost my usual self. Not quite there yet, but almost my usual self. I haven't therefore done a huge amount of crafting. I've done little bits and pieces, but I hope you've noticed from the opening credits, I'm trying to develop my, sorry, I've got something in my ear there. I'm trying to develop my editing skills a little bit further. I learn little bits at a time and then try to get them down to pat. So I haven't been doing nothing creative, but that's been quite a steep learning curve in itself. So I haven't been doing as much knitting and crocheting as I would like to do. But I have made quite a significant dent into my shawl. So here she is. And obviously, at the moment, I'm halfway through a line, so I'm not going to let the needles go. I'm really quite happy with the way it's looking as well. I really love the yarn. This is the Cloudborn. I've left the tags over there. This is the Cloudborn Highland Sock Twist. In fact, I can see what... I have 2 extra skeins of 2 of them. And I've just seen them here. Yes, so it's Cloudborn Highland Sock Twist, and I believe, I've got my glasses here, Bob, Wendy, I believe it's 100% wool, if I'm not wrong. Let me have a look. No, sorry, I tell a lie, it's not. It's 8% superwash fine Highland wool with 20% polyamide, which is a form of acrylic, I guess. So it's Craftsy. It's made in Peru, but it's the Craftsy label, if you like. It's what they sell. And I know some people who follow the Grocery Girls don't like the fact that they're on Off Our Needles pushing Cloudborn and Craftsy classes. I personally have absolutely no problem with it. As they say, it's not as if they themselves haven't used those things, but you know, they're promotional videos, and I don't have any concern about that. I've used Craftsy classes a number of times, as you know, for learning various different techniques. I've mentioned them before. And that I found the classes to be very enjoyable and very clear and helpful. So it's not as if they are fronting an advertising campaign for products that we don't want or don't like. And I have to confess, I've been using this wool now for the last, well, I guess 3 weeks. I really like it. It's really very nice to handle. It's very soft. If I didn't know it was 80% wool, I wouldn't guess there was any wool content at all. It's so soft. I'd have thought it was something more like alpaca or something similar. So I can thoroughly recommend the wool anyway. And obviously, being a sock, I should have realised if it's a sock wool, it's going to have 20%, at least 15% nylon or silk or polyester in it, isn't it? So it's a really simple pattern, and I love the mild look. I love the way in which the wool, the 2 strands of wool, because you use 2 colours at a time, and the pattern gives you which 2 colours and how many rows of these blocks you're to do in each of the colours. But it's not entirely predictable how the wool is going to appear in the final product, because they are twisting around as you knit the row, and then as you purl back they twist around again. So it's producing a really lovely effect. There is an I-cord edge, which is the top edge of the shawl, which is here, and it's an asymmetric shawl. So it obviously every other row increases, so it's getting wider, so each row takes progressively longer to do. Once I've finished the body, which is in stockinette, then there is a kind of faux cable row here, which doesn't stand out very well at the moment, but once it's blocked, this will widen out, and it's quite a nice detail, in fact. And there's an eyelet created by slipping a stitch over and then yarning over in the next row, which produces this hole. And this edge, which is at the moment a garter stitch, will be unravelled when the whole thing's done, and it will be turned into a fringe, so there's no weaving in of ends, which is music to my ears, because you can see how many ends there are. So although it's quite straggly at the moment, these will simply be incorporated into the fringe and then trimmed down to the same length when it's finished. They're just long enough that the stitches aren't going to unravel. I think I'm on course to use the right amount of wool, although I'm finding that although I did do a swatch, and my gauge was exactly the gauge of the pattern, I am finding that, and I found this with the Tin Can Knits pullover that I made as well, that I have more wool left over than I should have. Anyway, I'm not going to complain. If there is enough, I can use it certainly in other projects, scrappy projects. So yeah, it's going well, and it's a very simple. It's basically a 4-row repeat, and large parts of the row are in fact in stockinette. So you only the first part of the right side row is 4 garter stitch, so that's just knit 4 across. Then there's the faux cable, which is only, I worked this out, there's 3 and 4 is 7, 8 and 9, so it's a 9-stitch repeat, or a 9-stitch section, which is so the garter stitch edge is the same on every row. The 9-stitch cable panel is different for every row, so there are 4 versions you have to remember, although they are largely the same on alternate rows. And then you've got a stockinette panel, which is knit across on the right side and purl back on the wrong side. And then there's the I-cord edge, which is a very simple alternating stitch pattern. So it's all in all not mindless, but very simple, straightforward pattern. So it's easy to do while you're podcasting, for example, or as has happened. And this is another silver lining to the clouds of the last couple of weeks. It's ideal for bus knitting, because obviously with my car in dry dock at the moment, waiting to be repaired, I've been catching the bus. So I don't knit going in the morning because I'm just a bit too sleepy, I think. But by the time I'm at work, I'm fully awake, so that's okay. But I knit on the way home, and I find it really relaxing knitting on buses, and I'm very keen, where possible, to knit in public, because first of all, I think knitting is such a good thing in itself, and why not knit in public? It's not as if we are antisocial by knitting. It's a very positive activity to be engaged in, but also as a male knitter, or crocheter, because sometimes I will crochet in public depending upon what I'm doing. I've crocheted at the moment. It's knitting in public because I'm knitting a project, but the same argument holds really. And I think it's very useful to challenge stereotypes that only women knit and so on and so forth. And at the same time, to encourage men who maybe haven't thought about being engaged in an activity like knitting, that, oh, actually, maybe it's not such an odd thing that other men do it. So that's a positive, because I should mention, actually, going back to the accident, on the Tuesday, had the accident, got home, phoned my insurance company to let them know what had happened, and spent an hour or so dealing with that. They then said that they would text me the details of the contact details, and that the accident management company would be in touch with me to fix the car and so on and so forth. And I gave them my phone number. And because I'd phoned on my work phone because I don't get very good reception on my personal mobile phone at home, they were going to send it all to that. And of course, I put the phone down, came back to it 10 minutes later, and the whole left-hand side of the screen had gone completely white. Don't know why. And the right-hand side of the screen was all fuzzy. So I tried restarting it, and I tried a soft reset. I didn't want to do a hard reset because there were a couple of photographs I'd taken of the damage to my car, but in retrospect, I can take those photos again. I have the car here. So I took it to work the next day, and our IT man tried to reset it, and he failed as well, and he tried a hard reset and that failed, so he had to get me another phone, another handset. The problem was we were using Microsoft Nokia Lumias. They were awful phones, absolutely awful phones. But it was a company phone, and it was fine for what it was used for, which was basically to give me access to emails when I'm not at my desk. But they stopped making them, apparently, or they couldn't get hold of them anyway, for whatever reason. So I now have a Sony Xperia, which, being Android, I'm much happier with because I use Samsung Galaxy. I have an S8. I've used Samsungs for the last 10 or more years. I think actually, I don't know if you recall, in the mid-noughties, the flip-up phone, the grey-bodied Samsung flip-up phone, that was my first Samsung. So it's been a good decade that I've been using Samsungs. So I'm very happy to have a Samsung, to have an Android phone, rather. And the Sony Xperia is not a bad phone, actually. I got it, though, only Thursday afternoon. And by afternoon, I mean in the 5 minutes before I was due to come home from work, it was given to me. So, unfortunately, I've not been able to get in touch, and I didn't feel like it on the Thursday. And I didn't want to do it on the Friday because it was the weekend. So I need to phone my insurer back to get them to resend the details to me so that I can then make contact with the garage and the accident management company to get my car repaired. So she has been sitting in dry dock, effectively, since the accident, because there is damage to the front bumper and the number plate, which I need to have replaced in order to be legal on the road. So she hasn't been repaired and does need to be before I can drive her again. And on that subject, I do have... There is going to be a confidence issue. It's going to take a little bit of effort on my part to get back to driving. This is the first accident I've ever had driving a car, so it's difficult. And knowing that I had done everything I could to avoid, knowing that I had done everything I could to be safe, and the accident still occurred, it kind of undermines your confidence in driving. But, you know, I don't say that I'm never going to drive again, but it's going to take a bit of effort on my part. But in the first instance, I need to get the car repaired, so Tootsie will be not being used for a little while until that happens. It's not a huge amount of damage, and being a smart car, they have a plastic body. It's not going to be expensive or difficult to do. They basically clip off and clip back on, and as long as the securing clips are fine, then there'll be no problem. And even they're easy to take off and replace, so I don't envisage it being off the road in the garage for more than a day to be fixed. Except for the parts. That will be the only hold up, I guess, because she's not a young girl, she's a 2002, so the parts are going to be a little bit harder to come by, but not that much harder. I've just replaced the door cable with the help of Andy, my flatmate, and Bob with his tools. He helped me take the door panel off, and then Andy helped me to, well, he did most of the work actually, I just helped him more than anything else. not because I can't do it, but because they were his tools and he brought them down and he said, well, come on, let's do it. And he just did it. So I just let him. Don't have a dog and bark yourself, I've always said. And he did a very good job, and the door works now properly, so that's okay. So yeah. So we'll get all that fixed. Sorry, this is... can I just assure any new viewers, this is normally a podcast about knitting and crochet, but I don't have a lot of knitting and crochet to share this week, so it's about everything else. So I hope I'm not driving you all away. So I don't have a huge amount, as I say, to talk about beyond what I've already talked about. But there is one thing I think this is probably a good opportunity to address, because it's something that I get asked, or people feel slightly embarrassed about asking, but really would like to ask. So I'm quite happy to talk about it here. Sorry, I'm just getting... There we are. It's the problem with 2 strands is you need to make sure that you get your needle in to both of the strands before you try to perform a stitch. Otherwise it's you're left with an extra strand, and you know, things are not... Oops, hang on a second, nearly there, we'll get there. Let me... that's why it's going into the... There we go, that got it. Anyway, so a question I'm often asked, and I thought it might be an opportunity whilst I've not got a lot else to talk about it now, which is, why did I join a monastery? In the Catholic Church, I don't know about other denominations of Christians, and I don't know about other faiths, which is why I'm prefacing that comment with in the Catholic Church. Marriage is considered to be one of the vocations of adult life. And one, therefore, to which not everybody is called. So a vocation is just a nice... I mean, vocare is just to call. So it's your calling in life is to marriage. And that will seem odd, I think, to many people. The idea that marriage is not just... something that you do in order to have a family, but it's actually something that God calls you to do. I think people are much more comfortable with the idea that priesthood is a vocation, and being a monk or a nun is a vocation. Interestingly, in the sacramental structure of the Catholic Church, being ordained a priest is a sacrament, marrying someone is a sacrament, but becoming a nun or monk is not a sacrament, it's a sacramental. And, you know, there is some argument that this is because of the insistence that there are only 7 sacraments. I personally think it's probably more to do with the fact that there are consecrated states for men and women, and perversely, if you like, or just curiously, being a religious is a consecrated way of life, but is not a sacrament. Because a sacrament is an outward sign of inward grace. Now, what does that mean in the terms of, well, in terms of marriage? The inward grace of marriage is that 2 become one. That is the Catholic definition of marriage, is that a man leaves his house and takes his wife and they become one. And that comes from Genesis. So there's a clear, I mean, clearly, physically, outwardly, you are 2 individuals. But in an ontological sense, sorry, this is going to get very technical, in the sense of the identity of who you are, no, that's not going to work. I'm trying to not dumb it down, but trying to in the sense of, yeah, I mean, your soul, I guess, is an ontological being, an ontological existence. Sorry, it's a while since I did definitions of theology. It's a good 25, 30 years now. Yeah, I think we'll go with that. In your soul, the soul of a single person is different from the soul of a married person. And that's because my soul remains individual on its own. But when you marry, the grace that's imparted through the sacrament is that the two souls of the husband and wife become one. Not going to say they become one soul, because you don't. You still retain your own souls, but they become united as one. And become, maybe this is safer grounds, symbolic theology rather than sacramental theology, become a symbol, a living symbol of Christ and his church. You have to be careful with that one, because the church is also Christ's body, and he is the head as well as being the bride of Christ. So it's all, you have to be careful which symbols you're talking about at any given time. And I'm not doing a very good job of it now. But these are not formal thoughts, these are informal thoughts. And the priesthood is a closer sharing in the nature of the person of Christ. So when you're baptized, you are anointed with oil. And when you are confirmed as a Christian, you're anointed with oil. And then when you are ordained, you are anointed with oil. And these chrismings are all the same oil. It's the oil of chrism. You also have the oil of catechumens, but this is the oil of chrism in particular for confirmation and priesthood. And this is what makes you a true Christian, the oil at confirmation, because the oil at confirmation is the oil that the word Christos in Greek and Messiah in Hebrew both mean anointed one. So you are anointed with oil. So by being anointed with oil, you become a Christ. You become more like Christ and therefore more Christian. And as a priest, obviously, you share more closely, in particular, in the priesthood of Christ. All baptized Christians share the priesthood, the kingship, the victimhood of Christ, and the prophethood of Christ. We're all filled with the Holy Spirit and become prophets for God in a small p kind of sense, not prophets in the sense of Isaiah and Jeremiah and revelatory prophets, but prophets in the sense that we witness by our lives to the truth of the gospel to other people. So a monk and a nun, they don't really fit into those two ontological changes. There isn't an ontological change with a monk. The individual soul remains unchanged at the point of solemn profession. And that, I think, is why it isn't one of the sacraments, even though it's an important vocation in life. So why did I become a monk? From being a very young age, I'd wanted to be a priest. And if you'd asked me at the age of 10, why do you want to be a priest? I would have given the banal, if you like, certainly the childlike answer, to help people. And if you'd then done the follow-up question, well, what's the difference between being a priest and being a teacher or a doctor? I would have known that there was a difference, but I would have been more hard-pressed to say what that difference was at that time. By the time I was at university, I came to understand the role of a priest was not simply about helping people in the direct activist, doing something for somebody, as a social worker might, or as a teacher might, or as a doctor might. But it was more about providing people with the supports and leadership and strength and sacraments that were going to help them to live their lives. and that was mainly going to be done through the liturgy. When I was born in 1968, the Second Vatican Council happened between 1959, 1960 and 1963. 1964, I think. Anyway, certainly it was opened in the reign of St. John the 23rd and was closed by Blessed Paul VI. So Pope John was 1958 to 1963 and Pope Paul was 1963 to 1978. So the Second Vatican Council was trying to react to a changed world. If you think that the First Vatican Council, which was the previous council of the Church, had happened in 1869 and closed in 1870 with the Franco-Prussian War, at that point in time, virtually every country in Europe was some form of monarchy. Some of them with monarchies like Britain's going back 1,000 years or more. Others much more modern monarchies that had seen revolution in the 1800s, or as in the French, the 18th century. And most of them were making some steps towards some form of representative democracy, but had still got a long way to go. So, for example, the 6th of February, which is Tuesday this year, is also, which is my technical podiversary, is also the first and the 100th anniversary of the vote being extended to women in the United Kingdom. It wasn't full suffrage. I think it was women over the age of 29 who were married. I think it was fairly limited as to who could actually vote, but it was the first step towards full women's suffrage. So, you know, even a country like Britain with a constitutional monarchy wasn't fully democratic, in that half the population weren't allowed to vote at all. So, you know, 70s for women who wanted to vote in the UK and elsewhere in the world. And so by the late 1950s, we'd been through the First and Second World Wars. We'd seen the monarchies of Europe tumbling or significantly altering to become fully constitutional. We had seen the ravages of the Nazi takeover of Europe and the destruction of 50 to 60 million people, including the most severe pogrom against Jews that has ever been carried out, and that fundamentally changed the mindset of people about racism and all connected subjects like eugenics, anti-Semitism, whatever it happens to be, as well as speeding people along the democratic process. So the late 1950s were a time of real optimism that the depredations of the last century could be put behind Europe in particular. The European countries were moving into their post-colonial period, so had decided that being mighty imperial monarchies was no longer the way forward for them. So there were lots of groundswell movements that the church got caught up in. And part of there were lots of changes, but the one that really hit home the most, of course, was the change to the liturgy. And I know from my parents that they did a lot of soul searching when the liturgy was changed into English, because they were really not happy with that. Not so much that it had been changed into English, but that the liturgy itself had been fundamentally altered. And it had, and I can understand why it had. I don't suppose many of you watching have ever seen an extraordinary rite liturgy, as it's now called, what had been the order of Mass up until 1968, which was very much a liturgy carried out by the priest at the altar with the servers and deacons and subdeacons, at which the congregation observed but didn't really take part in any active sense. They were praying and they received communion and they would sing certain parts of the liturgy like the credo and so on, but for the most part the liturgy was carried out by the priest in a very quiet voice most of the time, so that the people didn't hear what was being said, but they all had missals and read what was being said, and everybody was facing the altar, and it was a very when celebrated well, was a very mysterious and mystical event, but when celebrated badly, was just a hodgepodge of nonsense and left people very unsatisfied. And a lot of what happened in the 1950s, the church moved from its prison-like mentality following the Franco-Prussian War and the reunification of Italy and the loss of the Papal States and the prisoner of the Vatican and the Concordat with Italy, with Mussolini, and then the Second World War, where the church is put under a lot of pressure from both the communists and the Nazis and the fascists in Italy and the fascists in Spain, and all kinds of bad deals being made here, there and everywhere, really. The church had, to some extent, stopped interacting with the world. It had moved into a very quietist phase where, we're simply going to ignore what's going on around us and stay true to our own traditions. And they did that, and that is a way of surviving tumultuous change, but it's by the late 1950s, in a lot of the countries of Europe and in America, there was a sense of optimism, a sense of the people wanting to move forward. And so the liturgy, when it changed, became effectively an activist liturgy for an activist church. It was all about gesture and word and response, and it was God talking to man through the priest rather than man talking to God through the priest. Largely, it kind of became that. That became the feeling in the liturgy. And my parents made a decision that this was the church that we were going to grow up into, so they weren't going to try and preserve in aspic the church that they had known and loved, but would simply move with the time and accept the leadership of the Pope and the bishops and move into the English liturgy. And we were very fortunate that we had parish priests who were good liturgists. So when they started celebrating the Mass in English, they still retained the sense of what the Mass was and the Latin liturgy was, and brought the best of the Latin liturgy into particular gestures, the sense of reverence, the sense of what it is that we're actually doing, which is, in the words of sacramental theology, the unbloodied representation of the cross of Calvary on the altar, and bringing God to earth in the form of bread and wine and feeding us the body and blood of Christ. So it's a very powerful liturgical action of gathering together, offering up and bringing down, and then re-offering back, and then celebrating our community communion. I am aware of significant liturgical abuses. I do not in any way support them. But I'm also aware that priests were trying to find the best way to celebrate the new liturgy within their communities. And I personally now go to what is called the extraordinary rite, which is the Ode Liturgy, because, and this comes back to why I joined a monastery, because I realised as an older teenager in my early 20s that it was the liturgy that was calling me to be a priest. And in fact, when I discovered Benedictine monks, because I'd read about them in history books, but didn't know that they still existed in reality, because I never had any interaction with real monks, as it were. I went on a retreat there with my university chaplaincy for 3 days and was simply blown away by the liturgy, by the steady simplicity, rich tapestry of language, music, sense, sights. And I wanted to dedicate myself to the proper celebration of the church's praise and worship on behalf of my family and friends and the church universal, the world, everybody, everything, to offer a worthy sacrifice of praise, if you like. And that was what I was dedicating my life to. And that's a realization that I've come to over the last 30 years, really, from deciding I was going to be a priest right through to actually becoming a monk and doing my studies and living the monastic life. And so I think what this all boils down to, if you like, is that the contemplative in me is an activist only in the sense of an active participation in the liturgical celebrations of the church. That what drew me to the monastery, what draws me still to the liturgy, is the numinous, if you like. It is that sense of mystery and wonder and otherness and supernatural power that the liturgy can and should provide for people. So I'll be very happy and interested to hear your own thoughts on this, because I'm aware that I'm talking from a particularly Catholic perspective and a particular kind of Catholic perspective. I really would be genuinely interested to hear other people's views on their calling and on the liturgies or worship and prayer that their communities take part in. So please do feel free to share your thoughts with me, and I'd be really interested to hear what you're saying and to answer any questions that you have. So I think I've managed to fill an hour of me whittering away quite nicely on a variety of subjects. I think it's been quite nice, actually. I was a little bit worried that I wouldn't have anything to do on my podiversary, but I'm quite happy that I've shared perhaps more about who I am with you. I certainly feel comfortable doing so with you all. I'm very happy to celebrate the community that I think exists out there with people with whom perhaps I have nothing else in common other than my love of a particular pastime, except, of course, our common humanity. And I'm very keen always to celebrate what it is to be human, because it's such a wonderful thing. Going forward, I envisage still having a weekly podcast, still me sitting here talking about life, the universe and everything, for the most part. I think probably I will be interested in doing more of the rambling on episodes. As the days get warmer and longer, going out after work, it becomes a more realistic proposition to maybe go into Oxford now to do some filming there, because there's quite a lot, as you can imagine, of historical interest in Oxford, and it's a significant part of my local heritage. I lived in Oxford for 7 years. I've worked in Oxford for 7 years? 8 years? No. Yes, 8 years. No, nearly 9 years, actually. Ooh, even longer than I thought. Both as part of the university and a monk, but also living there, working as a bus driver. And of course, my work still involves Oxford, almost entirely. So it's very much a part of who I am here. So I will be doing more of those. I will also be recording more of the Anna Karenina. I really do apologise that I've just not felt like doing any over the last 10 days. But as I say, I'm beginning to feel much more positive about things again now. So I I really want to crack on with that and record more episodes for you. I also want to develop further some of my editing and filming capabilities. So one of the things as well as the standard episodes such as we've just had, one of the things I would quite like to do in the future is perhaps do a series of shorter recordings through the week and edit those together into a single large entity at the end of the week. There isn't any particular harm in or difficulty in doing what I currently do, although it does take quite a bit of time commitment to both record it and then edit it and then upload it all at the same time, which isn't too much of a hassle, but it is a time commitment. So there may be some benefit, and maybe capturing some of my thoughts through the week rather than trying to remember at the weekend everything that I've been thinking about during the week. And so there may be more editing involved, but it will still mostly be, these are never going to be fast-paced, slick-moving action videos. That's not the nature of a crochet and knitting podcast, so I'm sure you're relieved to hear. But I would like to just try and mix things up a little bit, just to keep it fresh and keep me interested and motivated, and keep you interested and motivated, so that I'm not simply going over the same territory over and over and over again. So yeah, I think that's everything. You know, there is something niggling at the back of my mind that I wanted to mention, and I've forgotten what it is. What might it be? Nope, can't think. Yes, no. I think that's actually everything. So, thank you for spending some time with me today. Happy podiversary to us all, because whilst I record these videos, it's knowing that I'm interacting with you that actually makes them worthwhile and motivates me to do them. So it's as much your podiversary as it is mine. And until we spend some time together again, stay happy, stay safe, stay well, and keep crafting. So, bye for now.